Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a backlog banter review. I actually don't think we've done one of these on the new channel, but that means this is an inaugural, fantastic episode where we are going to be talking about Final Fantasy XVI. I'm Tucker Hazel. I'm joined by someone who actually hasn't been on this channel yet, Andrew Orozco of My Star Wars Show fame. I would say the fantastical Andrew Orozco.
Thank you, Tucker. Thank you.
Who is one of the biggest Final Fantasy fans I know. For a while, I actually only knew you as Mooglenator, which any Final Fantasy fan worth their salt will know is a spin-off of a Final Fantasy term. So I'm very excited to talk about this game and the two very different perspectives we both come from coming into this game, but both coming out the other side, absolutely adoring this game. I was fucking addicted to this game, and I really want to dig into why the game worked for me so much and is at the moment my number 2 game of the year behind Tears of the Kingdom. But what a surprise that was.
That's high praise.
Yeah, it absolutely is high praise. I slapped this baby a 10 out of 10 as soon as I finished it. So I'm really coming into this with high praise all around. And frankly, very few criticisms, though I do want to talk about some of the criticisms that certain fans are having and how that kind of shakes out in our minds. But, of course, if you're a Final Fantasy fan, we want you in the Discord server. We've actually been talking a lot of Final Fantasy recently. So we have a Discord server. And also, comment your quick thoughts on Final Fantasy XVI. This is a well-received game, but it's also somewhat of a controversial game. So I just want to know. I want to get a little conversation started there in the comments. But, Andrew, again, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Give me a little bit of groundwork for your history with the Final Fantasy franchise, and then what your short thoughts are on 16, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I've been playing Final Fantasy for over 2 decades at this point.
Wow.
I remember starting. I think I started right around with Final Fantasy VII because my cousin bought Final Fantasy VII. I played it probably around 2000, 2001, so a little bit after, a little couple years after it came out. But from there, I kind of like for me, my first exposure to RPGs was always Pokemon Red, Blue,
yeah, of course.
Yellow. So when I played Final Fantasy VII, I was like, oh, this is like Pokemon. But then, you have weapons and you're like not using special, like you're not being commanded. You're doing all the legwork and stuff. So yeah, starting with Final Fantasy VII, I got Final Fantasy 1 and 2 on Game Boy Advance, Dawn of Souls, which was a port of the original 1 and 2. And then from there, I kind of just filled in the gaps over the years.
Yeah,
I think before 16, like the last one I caught up on was Final Fantasy 3 because that was the last one to come over to the US. It was remade on DS, and that was like in 2007. So by that, from then on, after 2007, every new one that came out, I was like caught up. So.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is there just really haven't been that many new big Final Fantasy games. The time between them used to be basically nothing. I mean, they were doing them year to year in like the NES and SNES days, and then, well, of course, some of them weren't released in America, but then, even during the PS1 era, like, they were doing a lot. PS2 had 3, PS3 kind of had 3, but really only one type of new game, and then, since I've become cognizant of gaming, there really has only been 15, 7 remake, and now 16, of course, 14 sort of percolating in the background. And I think that change of pace puts a lot of expectation on each new game. And I would say, at least from what I know, I have no experience firsthand with these games, but with 13 and 15, those are games that aren't the highest regarded. People think they're fine, but have some major criticisms against them. And I think that the amount of time that it takes to make these games and what a monumental event releasing a mainline Final Fantasy game is puts a lot of pressure on these. And 16, I think, is feeling a little bit of that, but I think it's certainly the highest regarded one of the last 15, 20 years, which is saying something. Well, I guess 7 Remake also a very, very well regarded game, but 16 is doing really well, and obviously I'm really enjoying it. My limited experience with Final Fantasy only comes within the last couple years, which is up to that point I'd seen Final Fantasy. I'm like, okay, I know Cloud's very iconic. He was added to Smash Bros. Like I can recognize Noctis if you fucking like put a gun to my head, but I was intimidated by the series because there's so many goddamn games. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. They're all long. This is terrifying. So I just never touched them. But my introduction to Final Fantasy came through the lens of Final Fantasy VI, which I played on the Super Nintendo Classic.
The GOAT.
A game that, I love that game. but a game that is loved by many, and especially by Brandon Jones of ex Easy Allies fame, who adores that game and presented it as one of the Hall of Greats, Easy Allies Halls of Greats entries, and it ended up being included in that
Your friend Jared
pantheon.
Petty too. He loves that one.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people that really love Final Fantasy VI, and I just kind of jumped into it on a whim and then was sucked in. And I'd never played a traditional SNES turn-based RPG like that before, and came out the other end loving it. Played about half of Final Fantasy VII, the original Final Fantasy VII, a couple years later.
Really?
Didn't finish it. I'm gonna be going back to it soon because
Okay.
I should finish Final Fantasy VII. I also think I'll really like it now that I'm like a Final Fantasy fan.
Mm.
But 16 is obviously very different from those, and I want to sort of talk about you as a longtime Final Fantasy fan, how you are feeling about the changes that the series has made over the course of its history, but now the significant changes that have been made to 16, being a very different structure of a game, gameplay of a game, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what you mentioned about how like the release date order, like for the first 10 entries of the series all came out within the span of like 13 years of each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah.
Which is just like like if you play Final Fantasy 7 and you play Final Fantasy 8, like you'll see like the little copyright logo, and so they're only like a year apart basically.
Yeah.
And then every other one up until 10 is only like a year apart. So it's insane at the rate they were like cranking these out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right about that, where you get to the point where starting with 12, because 11 was an MMO that came out I think like 2 years after 10. But once you get to 12, which came out, I want to say 2006. I could be wrong. I think it's 2006. Like, there's larger and larger gaps between the entries, and of course, I mean that kind of goes with like what some people have been talking about in the industry, how like just that development cycle gets longer and longer and longer. It's kind of unavoidable. Definitely. But I do think those long gaps and those long pauses you mentioned do give fans of the series time to kind of like build up what they're expecting, kind of let their expectations kind of run amok, and then when you get the thing, it's not like the thing you had in your head, right, of what they're supposed to be. Pretty much until 12, they're all just turn-based. I mean, 12 lets you walk around, but really you're not doing much until your like little ATB bar fills up. So it's not until 13 is kind of pseudo turn-based, because you do have like a little bar that has to fill up before you can move. It's not until we get to 15, and technically 14 is MMO, so you still have to wait for the little cooldowns and stuff. But 15 is when we finally get to like Kingdom Hearts style, where like when you attack, it happens instantaneously. So 15 and 16 are definitely the first two like action Final Fantasies. And I do get the criticisms as somebody, because I see both sides. I see the whole, I think it's silly to say this is not a Final Fantasy game when it clearly is a Final Fantasy game. But if you look at the lineage, if you look at the timeline of all the Final Fantasy games, this is definitely the least Final Fantasy of the Final Fantasies, I think. At least of the mainline ones.
Sure. Yeah. I think that the identity of a Final Fantasy game being sort of in question with the release of this game is very fascinating to me, as someone who, again, only has limited experience with the series. But one thing that I do know, and anyone who knows anything about Final Fantasy knows, these games are constantly reinventing themselves.
Sure.
It's a new world basically every time. It's new era, new combat, how you approach upgrading your character, or even in the earliest ones, what kind of jobs you have. Are the characters named? There's so many changes that have gone throughout the course of this series, and the one thing that I've heard, doing a lot of research and listening to a lot of conversation around 16 and its place in the series, is that Final Fantasy, through the lens of the creators, has always been trying to push the medium forward in terms of visuals, in terms of storytelling, and that's absolutely been true. I mean, you think of how beloved 6 and 7 are, especially. Those are the best looking games and the best story games of their times. And 16, taking as long as it took to make, and being as vast and as modern, relatively, as it is, with having action combat as opposed to turn-based combat, feels like that natural progression. I mean, you think of how 7 has a more active time battle than the strict turn-based of previous ones, and it gets more and more actiony until you hit 16, which is intentionally so designed by people who are behind the Devil May Cry combat, and so it's aping on that, and it's pulling in inspiration from other places, and that reinvention and the staying on top of the current modern edge of technical fidelity and storytelling, I think, is where, to me, this feels very much Final Fantasy. I don't have the expectations that people who have been playing this for 20 years, like you have, brought into it. But I'm really able to appreciate it as a continuation of that legacy of pushing the medium forward and trying to always be on the cutting edge. And 16 really is that, for me. And I think it's a remarkable game. I have very, very few criticisms with Final Fantasy 16.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Tucker, because there's like having been a huge Final Fantasy fan, I've gone back and like read like interviews and stuff like that where as far back as I think 10, like they already had the notion of what they wanted to do with like more action stuff. It's just that the tech wasn't there yet. So like, for example, in 10 is Final Fantasy 10, you're still doing like the random battles where like you like something pops up and then the screen transitions to another screen and you have like, your battle, right? Like they wanted to do like where the enemies are already on the map and you just like walk up to them or encounter them. Like as far back as then, it just wasn't there. It wasn't until like 12 when they were finally kind of able to do that. And then 13 and 15 is when they really, really leaned into that. And as you were saying about how trying the different Final Fantasy, or I'm sorry, what was the thing you said right before I started talking? I'm sorry, real quick.
Staying on the cutting edge of technology?
Yeah, okay, so we were talking about tech. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
they never saw themselves as, I think there's an interview with I think it was Nomura or one of them where it was like, we never saw ourselves as just only doing turn-based RPGs. Like we always wanted to do, we always wanted to push the envelope. And you definitely see that because I remember Final Fantasy VII was like, at the time it was made like the most expensive video game made up at that point.
Yeah, that's what I've heard,
with the CGI and like I mean, it looks kind of goofy now, but back then like that was
definitely does.
It was more like cutting edge, right? Like they always push the thing. I remember on 10 for PS2s, like the voice acting, like that was a new thing. They were the first time Final Fantasy was like voice acted, and they've always done the weird things to kind of just push the envelope. And 16 definitely does that in the just because I mean the voice acting is phenomenal. Just phenomenal.
Oh my god, it's so good. And we're gonna get into a lot of those.
And they just recently patched the game so you can turn off the blurry motionness. And I tried it a little earlier this week, and I'm like yeah, this game's still. Dude, when you first see the giant mother
this
crystal
whole thing
up
is spoilers.
Close,
I do not give a fuck. We're gonna talk in spoilers this whole time.
Sorry, guys. First see the first mother crystal in that underground area, like up close, and it's just like a glistening mountain of sparkle and light. I was like, I paused for a few seconds. I was like, wow.
Yeah, this is a spectacular game. It's a game filled with lots of spectacle.
It's a showcase. It's a showcase.
It absolutely is. And it is one of those games, one of the very few that is PS5 exclusive. This is not cross-gen. It's not even cross-platform. You can't play this on Xbox, unlike 13 and 15, which is interesting. And it brings it kind of back to those PS1 days where those games were all PlayStation exclusive. And so it's like, oh, bringing it back kind of full circle there. What I think is interesting about this game is how it pushes the medium forward for its own series, because it is most voice acting, most cutscenes, highest fidelity graphics for the franchise, of course, most action combat, fastest game. But it is kind of in conversation with other modern games, modern action adventure games. The games that are currently the biggest and highest revered are the games coming out of Naughty Dog and Sony Santa Monica, God of War, Last of Us Part 2, God of War Ragnarok. And it's interesting where they take inspiration from that. And I think this I want to hone in on as sort of my first main point of why I love this game, is that traditionally, other than the handful of exceptions, like Final Fantasy VI, which is a game that I appreciate a lot, I find long games in fantasy settings, turn-based games, to not be my like immediate, oh my god, I love this. This is enrapturing me for a super long time. I prefer flashier combat. I prefer shooting, frankly, to hack and slash combat. Like there's a lot of elements that this series has had that don't instantly appeal to me, which is why it was something I never really gave a true shot until just a couple of years ago. But because Final Fantasy XVI is significantly more linear and is about those spectacle moments and about the cutscenes and the characters and the voice acting in a way that Naughty Dog and Sony Santa Monica and these other teams, Rockstar, have been pushing forward, it slips right in that place for me, where I feel like I'm playing a game on the quality level and, for me, the same amount of appreciation level that these other games that I consider some of the best in the medium, like God of War and Last of Us, are. And it's just interesting that you can now pretty much one-to-one compare Final Fantasy, the long-running JRPG turn-based series. You can compare that to what Naughty Dog is doing with The Last of Us. I think it's a very interesting change that they did, but it's something that really, really appeals to me. And as this game's own identity, I think it works so well because it's so quality in those spectacle moments, in the fidelity, in the voice acting, and the character work.
Yeah, I mean, those two titles you just mentioned, God of War and Last of Us, too. Like, I think of what do they have in common besides being first party Sony first party studios, and games, and it's what this game, what this Final Fantasy has that the other ones don't really have much, and that is a fearlessness when it comes to like approaching maturity.
Sure.
Because this game,
this is the first rated M Final Fantasy.
The first rated M Final Fantasy. Like, I remember starting the demo, and there's like, I mean, it's kind of censored and covered up, but like just like a sex scene basically in the hallway. Yeah. And I'm just like, what? Like, immediately I was like, oh, so this is what the hard M is for, basically. Because like there's, I don't know how many times Clive drops the F-bomb like in the first few hours of the game.
He does.
But like, I was like, oh, okay, like this is the grown up Final Fantasy now.
Yeah.
And it's just like the approach to, because other Final Fantasy games don't really go on this, but like the idea of like, in some pundits have kind of criticized the games, they think it doesn't go far enough, but it talks about like slavery.
Yeah.
Talks about it's very Game of Thrones like, with a lot of the maturity of like just nation versus nation, and I don't certain characters who don't mind killing or stepping over others to get to a higher position. With one of the main antagonists who this game has like one of the antagonists that I've hated the most in the entire series. And
sure, we'll definitely get into that.
Yeah, and so I think you're right. There's a lot of, it feels like it's like this isn't your grandfather's Final Fantasy, right?
Yeah,
it's very mature in tone. They're not afraid to touch on things, and like you said, like Last of Us and God of War, like there is a lot of familial strife and a lot of bond making, breaking, just like in those games too, where most of the story is about the people who are close to you, right? I mean, God of War is like this epic journey, but it's ultimately about Atreus and Kratos, and then Last of Us is about Joel and Ellie. And in this game, Clive's relationship to those around him, how he serves his people, how he thinks of his people, how he views them as his responsibility, I think is just as big of a focal point as the mother crystals are, in a way.
Yeah. One second, I'm going to take a sip of water. Should have done it earlier, but
I could have timed that better.
Okay. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that that's part of the reason why this game ended up resonating with me so hard, and why I got so invested in the characters and the world and the story in general. Something that you talked about, or something that you wrote in for one of our discussions that we've had here on Backlight Banter, is why JRPGs appeal to you so much, is attaching yourself to this cast of characters and getting to know them so well that by the end you're like, no, I don't want to see you go. Oh, you want to go talk to all of them. You want to know their full backstory. You want to do all their side quests because you feel attached to this. And this game starts off very distanced. Clive is, you have a flashback section that is about him as a child and his beginning relationship to his family and Joshua and Jill, but that's a pretty short segment. Right. Then for the first 5 or 6 hours of this game, maybe more, Clive is a very cold and distant person. He has been treated as a branded slave for a long portion of his life. He is sort of disenchanted with his own power. He doesn't think that his brother's alive. He doesn't think there's any hope for the land of Valisthea. And that, at the beginning, I was intrigued, but it meant that I felt very cold on Clive. I was like, who is this guy? He's kind of just an edgelord. I'm not really feeling it. But I think the game picks up a lot of steam for me connection-wise as soon as you start warming up to Sid and Goots and Gav and Karen, and you get to the hideaway and you retrieve Jill, and she starts to warm up to Clive again and her situation. And then especially after the time skip, once Clive has filled the role of Sid and you have the new hideaway, I am so invested in these characters, and I want to know all about them, and I'm recognizing their voices and their relationships to one another. And by the end of the game, there's kind of this rally, everyone's standing around like the deck of the hideaway and getting ready to I took a ton of screenshots in that scene, but getting ready to let Joshua and Clive and Dion go and defeat Ultima. I realized that I am so invested in these characters that I don't want to go beat the boss yet. I want to make sure everyone's okay. I want to go talk to Karen, find out what her thoughts on the situation are. Make sure that that Jill is doing all right. Like I care about everyone down and down the list. And that vast cast of very well defined characters that are well acted and have incredible backstories. That is something that I really look for in my games, and is why I love games like The Last of Us 2 and God of War Ragnarok and Red Dead Redemption 2. They have like 10 characters, if not more, and I know all of them, and I know all their voice actors, and I know their pasts. And Final Fantasy 16 takes a while to get warmed up to that, but once the story is settled in the place of Clive being Sid, I was locked in, and I spent so much time doing the side quests, which are, I think, maybe the biggest criticism of this game, and I certainly going to get to those. But what are your thoughts on the ensemble cast as a whole? This is one of the first Final Fantasy games to not have a party or a party system, and only one playable character, which I know a couple have done before this. But the party system is ostensibly non-existent here. Torgal stays with you for like 95% of the game, but then sometimes Jill is with you, sometimes Sid is with you, sometimes Joshua is with you. But being so different from the party system of the previous games, how do you feel about the cast and that change that they made to it being a one character playable and basically no party system?
I like the point where I like how you mentioned the because I didn't realize it until that moment where like everybody was on board, but I really felt like there wasn't that many characters until I saw them all at once in front of me, and I was like, oh shit, I forgot, like, oh yeah, these are all technically like main story characters. Like it wasn't until they were all splayed out that way for me to notice that, but up until then I was like kind of like, I mean, as someone who's been playing these games forever, like 6, what I love about 6 is the massive party. You have like
absolutely,
like 16 plus characters, and each one kind of gets enough time to get developed. You know, they all have their own like combat, like their own battle gimmicks and stuff. But and then coming to something like 16 where you're only playing as Clive, and I mean, in Final Fantasy 15 you only play as Noctis, but you can jump around briefly, you know, to the other characters.
I actually have not played 15, though that game ostensibly has a party system because you're traveling with your boys the whole time.
Right? The boy band. That's right. That's right. But I think
I want to get to that game. I feel like I'm going to be a Final Fantasy 15 fan.
I like 15. I think 15 is cool. It's not my favorite, but I think it's pretty good. I think it's good for what it does. But back to 16, you only have Torgal with you consistently, and that is one of the things I do lament, is that there's just, I love the party system. I love seeing how different characters fight. Like I mean, 7 Remake, I don't know if you played 7 Remake, but in 7 Remake, you can, Cloud's your main boy, but you can still jump around to Barret and Tifa and like use them for a little bit or whatever. Like while you wait for Cloud's like cooldowns or whatever, you can jump to somebody else. And you don't really have that here. What they replace the party system with, I think, is that you do have different ability sets, which are your abilities, which are almost kind of like a proxy for having a different, because each set I think feels distinct enough, so it kind of feels like you're jumping to alternate versions of Clive, where your basic attack is still the same basic attack across, but like you have 2 sub special abilities and maybe a third one depending on how on that ability acts. But I think that is one of my biggest gripes to the game, is that you don't have a party system. You don't have a party that's consistent with you throughout your quest, throughout the main story, other than Torgal, who's just like your faithful companion. But I wish there was. I wish you could do quests and be like, choose who you want to come along with. Like, oh, Sid, come with me, or Jill, come with me, or Dion, or et cetera, et cetera. I wish there was a little more flexibility with that.
Yeah, it is. I agree that it's also one of my biggest criticisms with the game. I think by the end of the game, it's kind of a non-factor, because as I was saying, I care about like 20 characters in this game. So regardless of if they're like literally fighting and traveling with me, they did a good job having them present enough and developing them enough and giving them enough personality to where it doesn't matter. I'm going to remember down the list, and I want to get to specifically some of the side characters, but I do agree that there are a few places where having characters that like traveled with you more consistently, or at least you were able to choose to have them alongside you, would have had them feel like a better fit better into the story and feel like a bigger presence. That I think is balance is a pro and a con, because I realized that so one of the strengths of this game is that everyone does feel very independent, and that they have their own quests to go on, and
Mhm.
Dion has his own kingdom to defend and his own
Right.
goals, and Jill has her own history that she has to sort of wrestle with. And so not having them like shoehorned in like always with Clive, I think was a good choice. But I wish there was kind of a middle ground, because especially with Dion and Jill, two characters that I like a lot, the fact that they aren't with you for a lot of the game does make it feel like there's a little bit missing from them. If they had been a core part of your party from the time that they showed up to the end, they would have had a lot more time to get fleshed out, to talk to Clive, for you to learn about them. And of course, that's
Mhm.
available to a certain extent in side quests, but especially with those two, I like them, but I feel like they could have been so much more, because they felt like they were supposed to be party members, and ostensibly they are,
Yeah.
especially by the end of the game in certain sections. So that, you're right, that balance is one of my criticisms, but again, it's a criticism that I think makes sense for the design and the story of this game, and ultimately by the end, even though I wish it had been a certain way, it didn't harm my experience, because I still love the wide cast of characters.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with you there. I do think just Clive being alone only with Torgal, though, I mean, you can't really have a dialogue with Torgal, really.
No, of course not.
I mean, you can
Yeah.
stoop down and press hold X to pet him, or
Hmm.
that's the extent of your interaction with Torgal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Until about halfway through the game where Torgal goes Super Saiyan or whatever, right?
Hmm.
But like, I don't know. Like, I'm used to in other Final Fantasy games, like you'll go from town to town, and like your party members will bring up things that, like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
from this place, or oh, that's so and
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
so, and like, I mean, that's kind of helped a little bit by the oh, well, I don't want to jump into right away, but I mean, let me bring Goots. I mean, let me bring Goots on a
Sure.
mission or something. Like, let me
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
pull Gavin. Like, what's he pull him out of the field? Let's bring him for like a mission or something, and just like
Hmm.
to have some kind of like dialogue or something, just to know like what are they about, like why
Yeah.
are you here, why are you part of this merry band of misfits and whatnot, like
Hmm.
just a little something extra, because I mean this game has like clearly this game had a lot of money, this game had a lot of money and time poured into it, but I'm like,
Yeah.
I can't imagine it would have been that much harder to just go the extra 5%, just to do these kind of things.
Yeah.
But you're right, because I think a lot of stuff is hidden in the side quests. I mean,
Hmm. Definitely.
you can completely miss Ambrosia, your chocobo
Yes.
mount,
True.
and
Yes.
like,
Very glad I didn't.
yeah, because that severely, especially in the later half of the game, that severely cuts down on your travel time within the
Hmm.
areas. I'm like the fact that they put that as a side quest, I'm like, man, I could have just skipped that and just been stuck walking like
Hmm.
a
I've been
doing
thinking about that as well. I
just
was like,
walking.
sure glad that I accidentally did this side quest.
Right, so I feel like they could have, I don't know. Maybe they were worried people wouldn't finish the game if they made it too like much longer, because
Yeah.
this is actually isn't that long for a Final Fantasy game. It's not the longest.
Hmm.
It's not the shortest either. It's about mid range, I think. But I feel
Hmm.
like if they had just integrated some more of this, like, why hold that stuff to the side? You could have put it in the
Yeah.
main, just to get people to try. Because I'm like, I played the main. Obviously, I beat the game, but like I only did probably maybe about a third to a half of the side quests, and even then I
Yeah.
only paid
Yeah.
attention to the ones that had like the little cross thing, the little cross symbol,
Mm.
because a lot of them were just kind of, I mean, a good portion does reveal this. It's mostly like the struggle of the branded.
Hmm.
Like there's some sick, like really like the dude who like has his branded and he sends him out in the field to fight
Yeah.
creatures just for
With a
his.
dog. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like, oh, that's dark. Like that's not something
Yeah.
you would have gotten in a previous Final Fantasy. And just like I think it does flesh out Clive more, like his feelings in terms of the branded, where he just feels he's like very
Hmm.
self righteous, not in a bad way. I'm sorry, self righteous, but he's just very righteous, like a righteous guy, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, they should have put some more of that stuff in the, I think, in the main quest. They could have found a way to make it fit, I think.
Sure. Yeah, no, and I think that's definitely true. And again, the side quests I think are the biggest sticking point for a lot of people when it comes to this game. I do agree that there are a good amount of them that are not particularly interesting, where it's like, hey, my fucking bread machine broke down. Go get me 20 iron
Go get sand,
and
pick
kill
up
a
some
crab.
sand.
Now that sand thing is actually a problem, because it is a
That is in the
side
main
quest, but it's
quest.
part of the main quest. Yeah, that's actually one of my biggest critiques with the game, like that. The few side quests that are integrated into the main story. So maybe it's a good thing they didn't do more. But I feel of two minds with the side quests. I feel there are some that I criticize as being mindless and simple and not particularly interesting, and But I think on the other hand, maybe the majority of the side quests I feel are incredibly important to my love of this game and my connection to the characters and my understanding of the world, because there are so many side characters and each of them have a number of missions. And they're even like fucking Z tier characters in the Hideaway, like a group of kids that Mid is teaching that I
Oh
like got
yeah,
a side quest for,
yeah.
and that side quest is very simple. But I think what a lot of the side quests do, even through their simplicity in terms of gameplay and structure, enriching the world and letting me get to know the characters, really sold me on being in love with this world and in love with these characters. And when you talk about wanting a little more from Gav or Goots or Mid, though that's in the side quest, and doing a side quest that is about Goots's worry about Charon, and they're learning a little more about their history, and in Karen's history as a traitor and why she's banned from certain places, and Goots' backstory with his parents selling him to Karen. Like,
Mm.
suddenly I'm like, okay, I already liked Goots because he's big and he's goofy and he's got a funny voice. And I like Karen because I'm always going to her for my items and she's a gruff old lady. But learning about their backstory through that, I think, incredibly well written side quest suddenly made me love them to a deeper degree. And I got that from most. I didn't do all the side quests. I'm probably about the same as you. I probably did about half of them. But most of the side quests that I did brought something to the world that I felt was important, and even the ones that are about just townspeople in the other towns.
Yeah.
I did some of those that I really really loved, and you're right about that one where the Lord guy is sending his branded out into the field. That made me think in a different way about the context of branded as slaves in this world, or even another one in a similar area. I'm not sure if you did this one, but where you're helping a little girl find her pet.
Oh,
And then
yeah,
it turns out the pet is
a Brandon.
a Brandon that has passed away due to the crystal's curse, and then Clive chews her out.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, you can't treat people like this. And that was a very simple side quest. It was mostly just walking to a windmill.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
that side quest made me learn about the world. It taught me something about Clive, the extent and the passion to which he's able to like defend the honor of the people that he cares about, the people being like the branded, like the slaves of this world, and what the people that aren't branded treat branded like. Like, that is a very simple, quick side quest that's totally missable, but it was core to my understanding of this world, and especially by the end of the game when you're getting a lot of hideaway side quests that are mostly from core characters. Those were incredibly instrumental in me learning about these characters and loving them to an incredible degree. And the one that sticks out to me, again, I don't know if you did this one or not, but I went up to Joshua, and Joshua was like, have you noticed that Jill hasn't been feeling quite right since she like came back from defeating her old master and all of that? Let's like talk about her a little bit, make sure she's okay. And it was this whole side quest about going to find the flowers that Clive and Jill had wanted to find when they were kids, but they didn't have the chance to.
Oh, okay.
And so you go talk to a couple of people and you find this field of flowers, and then when you talk to Jill, you're like, hey, I found these flowers. There's this incredible scene, one of my favorite scenes in the game,
Oh, wow.
that is fully animated, fully voice acted, like a full cinematic thing, where Jill and Clive stand in a field of flowers with the big city in the background framed on this hill with these flowers, where Jill makes I'm getting choked up talking about it. Jill makes a crown out of flowers and talks about how much this means to her and how she feels like she's been able to come into her own now that she's found the hideaway and Sid's merry band of misfits. And then they share a kiss at the end, which is one of the very few times that they have physical romantic. There's one very specific scene where they have that in the game, but this side quest, they share a kiss, and like it's an emotional scene with a lot of orchestral music in the background. I'm like, wow, that was beautiful. It taught me about these characters. It made me care about Joshua because he cares about Jill. It made me care about Jill because I learned more about her, and it was phenomenal stuff. And there were enough of those to where I'm like, no, I think the side quests actually are good in this game, which I think is maybe a controversial opinion.
I haven't seen that quest. I haven't done that one, so that's the first time I heard of it. But makes sense because I do remember when they first go back to Phoenix Gate or one of the other locations next to his home. They do like when they both go back, they mentioned something about how that's like their first time back together, and
Mhm.
they mentioned something about when they were kids, something about a flower. So that does
Yeah,
track.
yeah.
I didn't try that side quest. So I didn't get all that. But that's nice though, because I think one of the criticisms I hear is that Jill doesn't have that much of a story or character to her. So I think
Yeah.
that would have been beneficial. I mean, I don't know how you would work that into the main quest, but like
Mhm.
it's nice to know that there is more to her than just what's presented
Yeah.
at face value. So I'm gonna have to go back and the thing is, I don't know if I should do the Final Fantasy mode and then do everything, or should I just
Mhm.
finish what I have on my current playthrough.
Yeah.
But
Mostly depends on if you want the platinum or not, because you got to beat the game on Final Fantasy mode to get the platinum, which is something that I'm not a fan of in games, like requiring that second playthrough on a higher difficulty. But yeah, I strongly recommend a lot of the side quests, and again, obviously I've been able to like beat for beat recount some of them, so they stuck with me, and they were well written and well acted, and I do want to talk about some of your favorite side characters and their voice acting, because as you mentioned, God damn, the voice acting's so good. I mean, even down to just some of the townspeople that like you like walk by a stall and you're like, whoa, that guy's got a unique voice and he's putting his all into this.
yeah, I mean, who else other than Sid? I think when I think voice acting, I mean, I think of
Yeah.
Clive. I think
God
of
damn.
Sid first, right?
Absolutely,
That
I totally agree.
guttural, deep, brassy, just I can't do the voice, but
Yeah.
you know, he talks like this. I can't do it right, but like we were talking about in the Discord the other day how you're like when you started playing Diablo 4 and you're like
Yeah.
wait, like is this guy Sid? And I was like, I have the opposite when I played Diablo 4 and I was like, wait, is Sid the guy from Diablo? And we were talking about how the voice act, I can't remember his name. What's his name? Do you remember?
Ralph Ineson.
Thank you. There you go. How he recorded both of those games like around the same time, but like years ago. So it's funny how they come out close to each other. But Sid is just a freaking badass. Like he is. Like you at first you meet him, I think when the game introduces you to Sid, that's kind of when like my interest kind of peaked a little. I'm like, oh, okay, like what's going on?
Oh, absolutely, I agree. Yeah.
This dude just shows up and clears the field with thunder and lightning, and I'm like, what the hell just happened? And so like, okay, he's another dominant and stuff, but like you're kind of wondering for the first few minutes or like for a little bit, I'm like, what is this guy's like whole angle? Like, what is he about? And then you kind of find out like not only is he just like this rebel guy, like he came from a high position. Like he was like the Lord Commander for Waloed. I think it's to pronounce it Waloed.
Yeah, Waloed.
And like it's not like he's just doing this out of survival. Like he's doing this out of like this lofty kind of principled position where he left a position of honor to do this thing where he's like you know what, like this world's falling apart, this blight is spreading, like not enough people are addressing the issue, something's going on, and like he sees the issue of how the branded are, how they're being treated. So he finds this little safe haven for Branded, and also at the same time encourages them to free more Branded, right? So he kind of starts his one man revolution that kind of spreads, and like this is like he's like the ideal like anarchist basically who has power and position, and he's just like screwed that. Like it's all about like we gotta like who we serve, like who we live with, like all these lofty goals, like that. It's kind of like what makes it cool, but it's mostly his voice that makes him cool.
Yeah, well, I think the political context of this game is something that I found myself surprisingly invested in. We were talking about the context of Branded and dominance and icons and this whole history and the wars between all these kingdoms. I found it surprisingly easy to keep up with. I think number one, and something that I think no one will criticize about this game because of the active time lore feature.
Such a cool
where you
feature.
can hold down the touchpad and it just shows up. All right, this is where you are. These are the people in the scene. There's a little bit about them. Like if there's an important term like dominant or Branded or fucking Mother Crystal or whatever, you're gonna talk a little bit about that. Clear it up. No issues whatsoever. But I think also the amount of time spent with all the characters of various kingdoms allows it to feel like a very richly vast interlocking web of political ramifications and conflicts. And Sid sitting in the middle of that, and the way that even after he passes away, which is a great sequence, and
in the middle too.
Literally in the middle, yeah. But even after he passes away and gives you Ramuh's powers, he's a consistent presence. Because everyone knew Sid, and they were all inspired by him. And Clive was inspired by Sid, and Sid made Clive a better person. And then going to Martha's Rest and learning about the history that Martha and Sid had, and then the fact that Sid had a history with Benedicta, and then that made Hugo Kupka mad. Like there's such an interesting web here that does all tie down to Sid and Clive, and because those are two very compelling characters, I always felt like I was grounded in this. I never felt like I was like shot off to somewhere else and like, oh god, what the hell's going on here? I think maybe Barnabas is like the main example of like what the fuck is who the fuck is this? What's going on?
Yeah.
But even though it is a very complex political spectrum that the game works with here, the characters are acted interestingly enough, and enough time is spent with them. You even get like cutscenes of just Benedicta and Hugo, or just Dion with his family, and so you're able to like get a lens into what's going on there. I was able to keep up, which is something I've never really been able to do with like large scale wars between nations and leaders, and then they're the people that they know and who they're commanding and like who's betraying who. That's something I'm usually not a fan of. But Final Fantasy 16 did it so well that I keep up with the world of Valisthea, and the goal to destroy the Mother Crystals. I think is a focused enough goal of Sid and what's the name for the group? It's the Outlaws or something like that. The Outsiders.
Shoot,
I can't remember the exact name.
I don't remember either.
It's something like that. Regardless, we keep calling them Sid's Merry Band of Misfits because we've been calling it so far. That goal, I think, as like the driving force of the story, is also really cool. And the fact that this group of outlaws is freeing the world by destroying its culture, I think brings up so many interesting thematic concepts, and the fact that nobody wants to trust them because they literally just like destroyed their like ostensibly their Statue of Liberty, and not only that, but like took away their electricity basically. Like but then the fact that it's for the good of the world at the end, but then maybe it's not because it's actually Ultima's plan all along. There's so much stuff here that is complicated, but is presented in a really digestible and enthralling way.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, talking about the destroying the Mother Crystals, like it's I mean, like playing the other Final Fantasy games, like there's a lot of echoes of where things seem familiar.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, since Final Fantasy One, crystals are like a big central theme to the Final Fantasy games. Crystals are like almost in every single Final Fantasy game, just like Moogles and Koopos. I mean, Koopos.
Yeah.
Moogles and Chocobos.
Yeah.
And,
and Sids.
And Sids. Yeah, there's this starting with like 2. I think there's a Sid in every game, but yeah, the it kind of reminds, because when you play enough Final Fantasy VII to realize this is kind of like when they go against Shinra and the Mako reactors. Where you're
because the Mako energy is destroying the planet.
Because you're basically,
I think it's very interesting.
You're essentially like an eco-terrorist, but in this because it's a medieval setting, you don't use that term exactly, but you're essentially doing the same thing. You're like Sid even talks about how like he knows he's going to inconvenience a lot of people before things get good, but that's a necessary step to destroy these Mother Crystals to like reverse the blight or whatever. Like he knows like we're not going to be viewed as good guys by everyone, and like that's kind of just goes with the territory of like what we do and stuff. But like there's a lot of echoes of there's a lot of Final Fantasy IV kind of themes going on in this game. There's a lot of
I've heard that. I don't know anything about Final Fantasy IV, so I can't say what it is, but I believe you.
That's fair. Yeah, but there's like a lot of stuff. I like how the game has like these. It lays out. You talk about like the map, or you talk about like the nations and stuff, but like it kind of lays things out very clear. There's 8 icons. There's 5 Mother Crystals. Like it's very easy for you to keep track of where you're at, more or less story wise, based off of what summons am I missing from the wheel of summon wheels, right?
Definitely
like,
true.
The game keeps it pretty easy. I mean, I'm sure you've gone to what's her name? Because with the V. Vivian, where she gives you like
you have to go to Vivian.
Yeah, but I like how she gives you like here's like the status of the realm, and here's like let me do this little animated graphic with you with this like story to go with it, and you're just like I'm just enraptured with it. I'm like, yes, tell me more about what's going on with all these.
I imagine that really tickles your historian brain.
It does. I was like, dude, like if we could do that for like a classroom for like everything, like that'd be. I mean, we have movies and stuff, but this is clearly designed as an educational, but kind of like background, like for fun kind of thing. And then like I think if you go to Tombs has the he shows you the relation of everybody like in a web. I think it's or it might be Vivian. I don't know who, but someone has like a. And then it changes based on the timeline. So if you like adjust the timeline, like it'll shift around and show you like, oh, this person's now deceased, or oh, this person's now introduced into the fray. And it shows you like a lot like time like year by year update of the relationships between the different nations and people. Like oh, this is so needed because I got confused about who the iron something the group out in the islands that takes like the second crystal. I got them
Mhm.
confused with like the Empire of I can't remember the name. Embrock, the Imperial or the Holy Empire of I can't remember the name.
Ultimately, it doesn't really matter.
Because
But
all
yeah.
the troops kind of look more or less the same. So like I can't tell
Mhm.
between Gray Armor Guy 1 and Gray Armor 2. Like so
Sure.
I kind of need the background, and like then you got the Republic down in the south. Like
Mhm.
I just know that is Hugo's people. That's the
Yeah.
Republic.
Dalmekia. I remember that
Dalmekia,
one.
thank you. And then a lot of the names are very similar. Like Dalmekia is very similar to like Damascus, which is like again in another Final Fantasy game. But also
Mhm.
the hunts. Did you do a lot of the
Yeah.
hunts, Tucker, or no?
I did some of them. Yeah, yeah. I did some of them for side quests. I think what I kind of want to tie all of this together is that I think this is a game full of a lot of quality of life features.
Mm-hmm.
It might be long. It might have side quests that you don't find particularly engaging. But the fact that this game is able to wrangle such a massive scale game with so much going on
Mm-hmm.
into a simple condensed area that is the hideaway, and you've got Vivian, and you've got Nectar, and you've got a couple of other guys there, and the shops are here. It is, I think, a very thoughtful game. Like, they put a lot of thought into making sure the hunts were easily accessible, and that you had a lens into the lore and each of the characters and the history through things in the world. I like that Nectar runs this board, and that Vivian gives you these lessons, and that Tomes has his little library up there with the kids that he's teaching, and
Mm-hmm.
it contextualizes them in a way that's not, okay, here's just a menu, and here's like you have a book in your backpack. Like, the fact that these things are connected to characters is not only great for the story, but great for the quality of life of this game. It's very easy to go to certain things and make sure that you know what's going on. And also, you've got the stone that's in the middle of the hideaway that lets you replay missions and do challenge modes and practice if you want to. I think that is all really cool. And with the hunt, it's not something that I was super jazzed about, because we'll get to the combat in a second. I liked the combat, but I wasn't like seeking to do a ton of it. But I like that they were there, and from all accounts that I've heard, these are some of the best fights in the game, and the fact that they're centered around Nectar, I found to be really fun. So yeah, I like the hunts. I didn't do a ton of them, only when they were
I did
required
like
for the
three.
few of the side quests
Yeah,
that I
I did
did.
like 3 or 4, I think total. But
Yeah,
did you do the Griffin one by any chance?
I did. I did the Griffin
That
one.
was
Yeah.
dope. I really like the Griffin fight. That was a
Mhm.
good like that felt like a proper like challenge to me when I got to
Mhm.
that. Uh,
Yeah.
what did you think about the difficulty of the game, Tucker? Because there's a lot of people complaining that the game feels too easy, and I think
Mhm.
I definitely see that because I feel like not. I'm not saying it's impossible to fail, but like on a lot of the boss fights are pretty forgiving. Like even the
Yeah.
kaiju size boss fights, like you're given a
Yeah.
lot of leeway when it comes to the timing on hitting the the R1 or the square.
Oh, that's definitely true. Yeah.
Like it's not that difficult, but I don't mind it because I mean I don't play Final Fantasy for difficulty. I play it for the experience of Final Fantasy. But what did you think about the overall lack or thereof for difficulty?
Well, I think for me, it's perfectly balanced, because not only am I someone who does not play games for difficulty or technical skill. I don't really care to get great at the combat.
Mm-hmm.
I play games mostly for the power fantasy and for the story. And for me, the power fantasy and the story are tied together. The getting to know Clive because he's a badass and he can fucking wreck anything in his way, that endears me to the world, rather than Clive had to fucking die 20 times trying to beat this boss. Which, of course, there are a few games, and primarily FromSoft games, that I do enjoy that different approach to difficulty from,
Mm-hmm.
but those are few and far between. And for me, the combat felt like it pushed against me enough, maybe because I'm not great at the game, which is totally possible, but to where I was barely squeaking by on a lot of these fights. Like, I was close on the end of my health. I was running out of my potions, and it was good for me that I didn't have to replay these fights a bunch of times, because I felt like Clive was on his last breath, and swing, he finally beat the boss, and that was awesome. That was an awesome moment, and I didn't have to do it again, and that's the story to me. And so, even though the game is easy and maybe more difficult for me because maybe I'm not very good at the game or good at character action games, and I still want to talk about getting to the combat after this,
Mm-hmm.
but I felt like it was balanced perfectly for my tastes, and I can't
Yeah.
criticize the game for being too easy, because I never felt like it was too easy, and that's a criticism from someone else, or like that's someone else's problem with the game, frankly, because I didn't feel it at all, and I felt like it was perfectly balanced, and especially because the combat flowed really well, and I felt it was really engaging, and the spectacle was there. Even if it was easier and I didn't have to really focus in on learning the combat, that wasn't a problem for me because I was engaged with the combat and I liked the spectacle and I was excited to get to every fight. And maybe that was because it wasn't too hard, like too stressful for me.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was in the same. I was in the same situation. I remember, even though I knew the game was kind of forgiving, like that last, like the Odin Barnabas battle, like
Yeah,
that.
that's a pretty tough one. Yeah,
I was like, I had no more potions. I was like on a sliver of health, and I was like, I know if I die here, like I'm just gonna get checkpointed back with full potions and stuff. And like,
hmm
but I'm so close. Like I just need to hang in
yeah,
there a little longer because I can see like he's like last sliver. I'm on my last sliver. I just have to keep dodging and dodging and dodging until I can get that perfect,
yeah,
that slow motion strike or whatever. So yeah, I never felt it was too easy, but I knew there was a safety net in place for me
true.
if I had difficulty,
Yeah,
if I had issues. So yeah, I felt like I was like, if it wasn't for that, maybe I would have felt different. But yeah, I didn't rely on like just constant, boss checkpoints and just reloading on
hmm
items and
true.
stuff. But I mean, there's some parts that are kind of tricky. For example, one of the hunts, you fight like they call it Ahriman, which are it's like a recurring enemy in Final Fantasy. It's like the one eyeball with the wings thing,
hmm
and that thing
Oh,
can,
I think that's the first one you do, right?
yeah, and that it casts Doom on you. And Doom is one of those moves in Final Fantasy where it kills you after a certain amount of time, no matter what your health is like. And like,
Yeah,
I think I died once against it because I wasn't able to escape the AOE effect that it projects ahead of time. So I wasn't able to get
yeah,
out of there, and Doom is a one hit kill. So like, there is moments in the game where, I mean, it has its Final Fantasy isms of like, oh,
hmm
this thing will just kill you if you're just not aware of this thing. So I think
yeah,
for the most part, it's not. It wasn't incredibly easy. It wasn't incredibly hard. I think it was just kind of fine. But
yeah.
for the most part, knowing that safety net was in place, that was like in the back of my head sometimes. Where I'm like, if I could just lose right here, and like I would still be fine. But anyways,
Yeah.
that's just kind of the nature of it.
Do you think that increased or decreased your enjoyment in any way? Like, would you have wanted it to be more difficult?
No, because I know that I knew ahead of time that it was a harder difficulty, like upon completing the game, if I wanted to go back
Sure.
and experience,
Yeah, yeah.
hardcore. I know for the hunts, I'm pretty sure for the hunts, if you fail those, there is no checkpoint for those. You have to start from the
No,
beginning.
I don't think so. Yeah, yeah.
So those are like, that's like you said, like if you want the challenging of like the challenge,
Yeah.
if you want the challenge, like you have the hunts on the side to go do those. And that's
Yeah, and there are like challenge rooms that like limit the amount of icon abilities you have access to
mhm.
and have harder enemies. And I'm I didn't touch that, and I will never touch it. But it's cool that it's there as an optional piece. And I think that for me, it's a strength of this game that it was beatable without a ton of stress. That
Mhm.
it flowed very well. I think that pacing can be something that I have a hard time with when games are difficult. I was
Sure.
even playing a game called Entwined yesterday, which is a twin stick puzzle game where you have to like dodge and like fit through holes. And I was by the at last level. I was sitting on this fucking thing for like 45 minutes, and I'm like, this is making me like the game less because it was difficult. And that's usually how I feel about difficulty. It breaks the pacing of the game. I get frustrated. It makes me dislike the design of it a little bit less. And because I didn't have those issues with 16, because it was an easier game, I was able to focus in on where I think the strengths of the game lie,
Mhm.
which are in the world design and the history and the characters and the lore and the combat, which I think we should focus in on now. I think the combat is quite excellent in this game. I think that my biggest gripe with the combat is that it's impossibly fucking basic for like the first 3 hours of the game.
Yeah.
Like all you have access to is do your little your Phoenix uppercut, and then you got to sit there and hit square 4 times, and then wait and hit square 4 times. Really fucking annoying. But that is only a problem for the intro to this game. I think once you start unlocking multiple iconic abilities, and then you have so many that you can only have a few of them,
Mhm.
and you're getting enough AP points to where you can customize, that I think lets the combat sing in a really interesting way. And I think something that I've really praised this game for is engrossing me with character action combat, which has never been the case before. I played all three mainline Bayonetta games last year, and I thought they were all fine. But one of my biggest gripes with those games, and the reason why I don't love them in the way that other people do, is I felt that the character action combat was so flashy and for me, sort of I didn't feel like there was enough to it to where I I didn't have to only button mash. Like I was essentially just button mashing when I played all 3 Bayonetta games.
Okay.
And because the fights were just back to back, fight to fight, and there was very little downtime in between, I felt like what's the point? Like I had nothing to grab onto. It kind of all just felt the same to me. But where I think Final Fantasy 16 fixes my issues with both long games and character action games is that it meshes the two. And when I'm doing a Final Fantasy 16 fight and I'm getting really good at it and it's flashy and it's fun and I'm using my iconic abilities, and then I have a cutscene and a little bit of exploration and introduce the characters, and then I'm back into another fight. Suddenly, it's not back to back anymore. There was something in between that let me reset myself and feel like the pacing was easing me into both of these things. And one of the strengths of my favorite games is when there are two very distinct types of gameplay in the game, and I can't wait to get to both. So when I'm in the fight, I can't wait to get to the story. When I'm in the story, I can't wait to get to the fight. And that's what Final Fantasy 16 did.
Exactly right.
Oh, the fights are awesome, and I'm really into this combat. But I can't wait to see what happens next in the story. And then when I'm in the story, I'm like, oh man, I can't wait for the next boss fight. And that is, I think, a strength of great pacing, of both elements being very strong and supplementing each other in really awesome ways. So I love the combat. It's easily my favorite character action combat. It made me love that type of combat, which I never had before. And I think that's because it's placed into the context of a super long, character-rich game with a variety of gameplay. I mean, you get some, like, Uncharted-esque, like, just walking behind someone and, like, shimmying along a cliff sometimes. And I like that because it slows it down and lets me breathe before I get sucked back into incredible combat with maybe the most particle effect I've ever fucking seen in my life.
No, yeah, I'm glad you said that. I forgot who. I told somebody else the same thing too, where I'm like, because a lot of people were complaining about like, oh, like this. I saw a lot of tweets when the game came out, like people were saying like, man, there's like a lot of cutscenes, and I'm like, yeah, it's great, isn't it? It's Final Fantasy. Yeah, you want story. Like, why would you complain about stories? But you're right. I would feel sometimes like, okay, this is running a bit long, and right as I feel that, I'll be thrown into like a combat situation, and then there's like times, there's times where like you're fighting, and then it's like, okay, we're almost done. And, like enemy reinforcements arrive, and it's like, oh, okay, there's more. Like, okay, and then right as I'm like, okay, like this is kind of starting to wear. Cutscene, like, oh, okay, good, thank you. So like you're right. I think that the pacing is well distributed, where it's out like the developers know like, okay, around this point, I think people are probably going to start to kind of just like fall off a bit. So let's put this thing in, and like it's. I don't think I was ever bored. Okay. Yeah. And I will tell you some of the Final Fantasy games I have played, there are moments where I'm bored, where it's just the long stretch between point A and point B, and there's not much dialogue and there's not much going on. You're kind of just going through the motions. I don't have that problem with this game, which is very surprising because I feel like that's very, very hard to pull off. I feel like a lot of games are like, there's Metal Gear, for example. Metal Gear, I mean, I know you haven't played all of them, but like I haven't played any. Metal Gear Solid 4, Tucker, like has as
I know has notoriously long cutscenes.
Like the ending of the game is, I think, an hour plus long cutscene, like hour plus, and that's not an exaggeration. It's like an hour plus, and it's just like here's like all the
sounds great to me. I can't wait to get to that.
yeah. But like, as someone who like action game, like you said, like action games are not my favorite thing. I play Final Fantasy for like turn based or like a little more like JRPG ishness. But I felt the pacing was great. Like yes, tell me more about this world. Yes, tell me more about this relationship between these characters. Like, give us some background. Like, like why do we care? Like when you, like I think someone mentioned like the part where you meet your uncle Byron. Like that part.
Lord Byron's such a good character.
I love that part goes on so long. I'm like, no, like I want to know. Like this is the first time these characters have seen each other in like so many years. Like he thought he was dead, and like I was like, oh yeah, like that's cool. Like let's kind of like revel in this for a little. Let's like kind of soak up this like happy family reunion, because the moments where Clive finds like Joshua again, or those are the moments where like I don't get choked up exactly, but I feel something. I feel something, and I'm just like oh, this is so cool. Like you're seeing like your family member who thinks you're dead or you thought was dead, and it's just like those are really cool like little character moments, and like some people are kind of just like. Get me to the next action set piece. I'm like, no, like let's enjoy this for what it is. So I think the pacing is great. As far getting back to the combat, which is what you were talking about.
Yeah, it's fine.
I'm sorry. For the most part, I always kind of just had a routine based off what enemies were on screen. Like I see a bunch of enemies. Okay, we're gonna do like the little Phoenix spin thing. To
love that one.
And then deal a lot of damage and spread them out. and I'll go individually and just pick them off until like just going with the feather thing
Yeah, that's a great move.
or like if for some reason
I love that it does a good amount of damage, but then it does more damage as you continue the uppercut. Like it has one hit, but then as the feathers are like going up the screen,
flourish. It'll like finish
so
it. Like,
cool.
oh, he's not dead. Okay, we'll finish him off for you, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yep.
And then like if for some reason the scattered, like the spinning doesn't do it, I'll switch over to the lightning one, the AOE lightning one.
Sure.
I forget what it's called. Like Judgment something, and like that usually does it. And like, oh, there's a big guy. Okay, let me switch to the Garuda one where like I just do like the claw thing to build up the stagger bar, and then do the thing where like where you pull them down. I forget what it's called, but it's like the
because it's your circle ability on Garuda. Yeah,
if it's
like
if
you
a
pull
big
yourself towards
guy,
them.
it'll launch you into the air. If it's a smaller guy, it'll just pull them towards you and stuff. So like, I love like just switching between the different like. Because someone was telling me like, oh, each skill set just feels like a different colored version of the same thing. I'm like, no, like there's a big.
I disagree.
It's true for the magic when you're just spamming the triangle.
Oh, true.
That
I never used that.
That absolutely does nothing, and it's almost like the elements don't even matter at that point because you can use fire on fire enemies, and it doesn't matter, right? I feel like the elements don't really matter in this game, which is weird.
No,
because in every other Final Fantasy game, like it's like Pokemon rock paper scissors kind of thing. So here, magic elements it's just nice colors and different movesets, but like I feel each one feels unique. By the end of the game, I was just spamming Mega Flare. I was just spamming Mega, just give me the big Kamehameha. I'll just like point it or whatever. Like I feel like there's a lot of variety, and each one does feel different. Like for example, Garuda feels very aerial combat based. Like you're encouraged to go up. Yeah. Like you can launch enemies in the air and then go up and just keep the combo going. And like, for example, the Titan one, like it's very like guard defense, like oriented. It was hard to get
massive hits.
It was hard to do the timing for like the perfect block, but when I did pull it off, it felt so satisfying. Yeah. Like just parrying it just right. So good.
I thought the icon abilities felt very distinct. I never had an issue with them feeling very samey. I also like you kind of settled into the ones that I enjoyed. For me, by the end of the game, it was Phoenix. I never stopped having Phoenix. I love that uppercut. I love the twirl. Yeah. But for me, by the end of the game, I had 3 that I think felt very distinct, which was Phoenix, Titan, and Shiva. Titan with my favorite fucking ability in this game, which is charge up this giant goddamn punch and just boom and just like slam into them and push them back and do a ton of stagger. And Shiva having these AoE ice attacks that slam gigantic shards of ice down and just like a ton of stagger damage, and then I'd go in and hack and slash away, and then like semi-prime myself into a freeze and be doing a ton of damage, and then use my swirl and use my uppercut, and that kind of synergy between all the moves and taking down the stagger bar, and I always felt like I had just enough limit break power by the time I was ready to do it, and my powers all seemed to line up at the exact right time, and like they put so much thought into having the abilities work together, and the stagger meter feel really good, and the animations and the feedback that you're getting in the controller. I think this game has one of the best uses of not HD Rumble. What's the PlayStation version of HD Rumble?
Feedback.
The haptic feedback. Yeah. Some of the best haptic feedback on PS5. Period.
Yeah.
Every moment, every pickup of an item, every hit, every crunch is reverberating in just a subtle enough way to it's not overwhelming, but there enough to where I feel like I'm really immersed in it. And that combat just flowed. And as I unlocked more abilities and spent more of my points, I felt like I was really getting invested in the combat. And I'm not a combat first guy in almost any game. But this game really sold me on its combat being tightly designed. And I think the variety in the icons are there. And especially for me, because they all have context. You don't get these abilities just randomly. Like, fucking Clive doesn't wake up in the morning and be like, oh, I have air abilities now. No, you take down Benedicta in a tough fight, and she's on the ground crying because she's lost these abilities that have given her power, and suddenly you have that ability. Clive is struggling with this idea that you can have multiple dominant powers, and he's still, at this point in the game, he's still struggling with the fact that he is a dominant, and there's not supposed to be 2 dominants of fires, and he killed his brother, and there's so much emotion and story tied into the abilities of this game to where when I feel like I'm using Shiva's powers, it's not like I finish the upgrade tree and unlock the next skill area. It's because Jill trusted me enough to give me her power. And I am using the ability of Shiva that Jill has been using alongside me for this entire game. And I just love the synergy between story and the progression and the abilities and having them feel like they all mean something. you don't get anything just randomly. They're all tied to story moments, and I really think that is a powerful choice that makes me love every element of the combat even deeper.
Yeah, you're right about that, Tucker. I mean, I agree. Like, I mean, most video games.
I also love that Clive is Mega Man. When he beats the bosses, he gets their fucking
Yeah,
powers. I think that's really
yeah,
funny.
he takes on their best move. Yeah, and that's yeah, because like a lot of video games, like your skill tree is just your skill tree. Like, there's no context really for the most part. I
Yeah,
mean, like in God of War, like when you get the blades of, he gets the blades of chaos
chaos.
again. Like it's, I mean,
Yeah.
that is a story moment. It's him symbolizing him
Yeah.
going back to his old
Ooh,
ways.
and the drop near spear in Ragnarok. Oh, and Brock fucking makes that for you. Oh, it's a great moment.
Yeah,
But like,
I love that. Yeah,
yeah,
but like, yeah, I mean, and some games like when you get like a ability or whatever, it's not story related. It's just like, oh, you just
yeah,
reach
yeah.
this, imaginary threshold to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas here, like, it's very much tied into the theme of the story, where like
Yeah.
I mean, when Jill gives you Shiva, like that's like a big moment. But then and then Joshua finds out, and he just punches Clive, like
Yeah.
kind of like how
Yeah.
like, how could you do that to her? Like, why would you, like
I'm getting full body chills thinking about
when
this.
he's like she would do whatever like for you, like why would you like kind of take advantage? And then Clive's like, well, this is what I have to do, this is how we win. And he's like, and then Joshua kind of pulls him back up. He's like you better be right about this, like because he sees, because as someone who is a dominant, he knows that like that's part of your identity is the icon and stuff. And then I like how each character approaches that differently, where for Jill it's almost more like a curse rather than her like being a gift, because she's abused and used for it, rather than it being it's something like being like, oh, like this is his power. She's like, no, like this is like a burden almost. And then and
it's very different from how Kupka and Benedicta and Barnabas approach it, where they're dominating over entire cultures and leading armies, and the fact that the context of the icons and dominance in this world is tied into the lore so succinctly. Like there's only one per element.
It's like the Avatar or something.
No, absolutely it is. Yeah. And the fact that like nothing feels superfluous. Like when you meet another dominant or see an icon fight, this is a fucking moment in history. Like witnessing the fight between Odin and oh god, what's Dion's Bahamut? Like witnessing the fight between Odin and Bahamut is like, these guys on the ground have never fucking seen this before.
Yeah.
This is like shaping mountains, and not only that, but there are these two characters inside each of them that have this whole history, and then learning the context behind Barnabas having Odin's powers because of Ultima, and Dion having Bahamut's powers, but then the whole thing with Clive's mother and her son that's also controlled by Ultima. There's so much context behind these things that even if they are ridiculous, over the top sci-fi fantasy nonsense where a guy turns into a fucking giant mountain monster and you've got Ifrit running up his goddamn thing. We'll get to the icon battles, but they're great not only because they're amazing spectacle and they're well designed and there's a ton of fidelity and the combat feels crunchy, but because there's context to all of this. The reason that Kupka turned into Titan is because he was fucking mad at Clive for killing his girlfriend and for cutting off his hands. And like the fact that there's story context to all of this, and you're not just fighting Titan, you're fighting Hugo Kupka, who has this whole history, makes all of it matter so much more to me. And I love that intertwining of lore and combat and spectacle. I think it's phenomenally done.
I like how they treat the dominance like if your nation has like a dominant, it's like almost like you have a WMD or something, where like like the part like where they're talking about like, oh, like Odin has taken the field. It's like, all right, let's pull our guy. Okay, let's go in there, Dion. And he goes in there, this little Bahamut thing for a little bit. Oh, Odin's retreating. Okay, I can go back now. Like they're not. I mean, they're like the end all be all, but like they use them very sparingly, where it's almost like like you don't want,
because they know the dangers. Like Dion doesn't want to turn into Bahamut because he's like, I'm probably gonna kill like 300 of my guys.
Exactly.
I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, there's like a lot of like we call it they call it danger close, where like you're in the military, where like you don't want to use the massive ordnance or whatever because you have guys in the field nearby, right? Yeah. So I like the idea of where it's like, okay, like they pull in their guy, okay, let's send our guy a little bit, like, okay, like we're gonna cause too much havoc, okay, it's just let our little guys continue with the fighting for us, kind of thing. And yeah, you're talking about the whole let's just get into it. The fight with, I don't know if it was a certain order or whatever, but like each icon, like you do the first one, the opening one, the demo one, right, where it's Ifrit and Phoenix kind of just doing their thing, and you're like, whoa, like this is like a big like fight, and then each successive,
but it's also, I think, the worst one in the game.
Crazy. when you play
Yeah.
that, you think that's. I agree with you, but it's crazy how you can play that and think it's the worst one because you're right. Because every other successive fight just ramps it up like a million.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
when you're having the
Absolutely.
fight with Garuda, like over the forest and stuff. Like I was like, oh,
Hmm.
like this is insane. And the next one with Kufa, and it's like, oh shit, this is really insane. And like, oh, now we're in space. Like it's just
Yeah.
like it's like the Fast and Furiousification of the boss fight.
Yeah, but it makes every moment that you're approaching one of those or finishing one of those or in one of those feel like a fucking moment. Like this is not only just really cool because it's well designed, but again, I think it's the contextual weight of it all. Like
Yeah.
these moments will be written down in history books for the fucking rest of time. Like the fact that Ifrit fought Titan in the ruins of a Mother Crystal, like the world will never forget this. And I really like that they made them as big and powerful physically and story-wise as they were, but it really is that variety that, you're right, is the strength. Like, you're not just fighting a guy who's got a couple extra moves because one does fucking ice damage and one does fucking electric damage, and you're like, maybe you gotta have a different kind of potion on hand to, like, deal with being put to sleep or frozen or whatever. You fighting Titan, there's no mistaking fighting Titan for fighting Bahamut. They are designed differently.
Sure.
You have to approach them differently. There's a different kind of spectacle. The music is totally different. The Titan fight actually has like a fucking DMC song over it. I'm not sure if I like that,
yeah,
but
like
it does make it feel different.
Something. Yeah.
Very strange. Feels very out of place.
It does.
But I think the variety. True, yeah. But the variety is the strength in these boss fights. They are spectacle, but each one is a different kind of spectacle. Fighting Benedicta feels a little more personal. Fighting Bahamut feels a little bit crazier because he's not in control of himself at this moment, and you know that you're on the same side. And so when Joshua and Clive are fighting Bahamut, they're so like, cool. we gotta like make sure we don't fuck him up too bad because he's actually gonna be on our side when he wakes up from this. And fighting Odin is like this whole thing. We're like parrying each other. It's like a one-on-one fight, and the fact that you lost a fight to Barnabas before fighting Odin, it's like there's so much variety in these, and so. I think this might have some of the best boss fights I've ever done in a video game. And not only does it have, one really cool boss fight at the end that like really is a culmination of the whole game. It's like, no, they did like 7 of them. And so each one could be the culmination of another game. But instead, it's just, the Titan fight is just one in the chain.
Yeah.
Of, you haven't gone to space yet or fought the god of time yet. But you're fighting a fucking mountain and you're running up his tendrils. And it's just, oh my god. They're so well done. They're so well done.
I forgot which one was I don't know if it was a Garuda one or one before that, but just the whole like L3 R3 to accept the truth and like go full so cool. Like your arm changes and you go like full effort and everything, and it's just like it's just so badass to the point where like each time I knew I was gonna get close to like when's the next icon, and then after Kuka is like when I just expected like I'm gonna pretty much fight all of them up at this point because I think obviously you skip Ramuh because of Sid and you skip Phoenix. Yeah. Oh no,
Shiva.
Yeah, Phoenix. That's the first one. I'm sorry. You skip Shiva because you're not going to fight Jill and stuff. Well, other than the beginning, but like after the Kuka one, I was just like how's the Bahamut fight going to go down, and like how's the Odin fight going to go down? And I'm just like thinking I was just thinking about how the other ones are going to go down. But the Kuka one, I love when you're just falling with him
forever.
And it reminds
you're
me
falling against him inside of him.
What
the hell is that? It's crazy.
It reminds me of the Balrog thing from Lord of the Rings where like Gandalf is falling with the Balrog. But like you're just like there's a part where you're just exchanging blows with it like super, super fast. Yeah. And I'm like, what is this? Like it's like the most Dragon Ball Z shit like ever, but like
it definitely is, yeah.
Dude, when you're fighting Ultima at the end and he's doing his Bahamut Mega Flare, you're doing your Mega Flare, and it's just like push mashing squared up like oh my god, dude, like the set pieces this you're right. I love the part where you're talking about Dio when you're fighting Bahamut and it's like oh shit, like we don't want to kill this guy, so you have to like hold back, and like he's not holding back though. He doesn't give a fuck. Like he's gonna just do.
But then that's also the first time where Ifrit and Phoenix like fucking merge into their ultimate fire form, and you're like, Jesus Christ, what the hell is this? And suddenly you have a new power, and the fucking music's going crazy, and of course you're in space at this point in time.
But you're also
I think that the
jumping back and forth because like Ifrit will and you'll be you'll do like this like gallery shooter thing with
like Rez or fucking Star Fox.
You're like just scrolling, you're like dodge and just like you're just like firing.
I think the spectacle of these is helped by the fact that the boss fights are very long, and that they have a ton of gameplay variety within them. Like moment to moment, you're only going to be doing one certain kind of thing against the boss for a certain amount of time. it's going to be an arena fight, or it's going to be you're trapped on a tiny platform,
bullet hell
or
yeah.
or exactly, or a bullet hell, or a quick time event, or they just intersperse a lot of really cool cutscenes within the fights, which makes them feel even bigger and have more damage, and the transitions are really cool, and they all culminate in distinct ways. And I actually like what you mentioned, that you don't fight Ramu or Shiva, because I kind of expected to. Like, I was like, because I got Garuda's powers, and then I was like, oh, I guess I'm gonna have to do this for every single one. And so, like, that means that I'm gonna have to fight Jill and fight Sid, and I was like, oh, I wonder how I feel about that. But the fact that they didn't do a boss fight for every single one, I think makes these moments feel more varied, because the fact that you unlock Jill's powers or Shiva's powers because Jill trusts you makes that moment feel very distinct from beating the ever-loving piss out of Hugo Kupka and then, like, having his fucking bloody corpse on the ground and you get his powers because of that.
Yeah.
Like, there's a difference between these moments, but they end up they have different resonance because of that. And by the end of the game, when you're fighting Ultima, and his fucking boss fight is like an hour and a half long, and there's so many stages of it, and you're in another dimension. And then you're right, I think really the sort of bow on top of all of this, and I think you and I actually were like exchanging DMs about this on Discord, is the fact that you have all the powers, he has all the powers,
like,
and you're using fire you're fighting fire with fire, or air with air, earth with earth, and not only that, but you're using the biggest, craziest moves, but then the voice lines of your friends inspiring you along the way plays. Yeah. It's so cheesy, but it feels so earnest. Yeah. No, not in a bad way. Yeah. Maybe one of my favorite moments in the game is that you're using Phoenix and you hear Joshua. You're using and they don't do like, okay, you're using Titan and suddenly Hugo Kupka's cheering on. No, it's Lord Byron or it's Gav, or it's Mid, and or it's Jill, or it's Dion, and you realize that I know all these characters so well, and the fact that they're cheering me on and they care about me and that I care about them shows a strength in writing and a strength in the voice acting, because you can instantly recognize all of their voices. And when Lord Byron goes, "Do it, my boy," you're like, that's fucking Lord Byron, and I know why I care about him, and this moment is awesome because of that, and it just culminates.
Yeah, it's a culmination,
and it has a quiet ending, which I think is really interesting. Like, you have that incredible spectacle boss fight against Ultima, but how do you feel about the ending? Because the ending is vague, and it is quiet, and it's simple, but I think it really feels powerful because of that. Clive is probably dead, and Dion is probably dead, and Joshua's definitely dead, and really all you see is Clive laying on a beach as his body turns to stone because there's no more magic in the world, because Ultima is gone, the mother crystals are gone, and you see Gav helping give birth to the child of the woman that he helped save earlier. And the ending focusing on like Mid and Tarja and Gav is so strange. But I think it works really well, because what this game is about legacy and the impact that we have on others so that others can live their lives to the fullest. And the way that Sid sacrifices himself for that, and Joshua sacrifices himself for Clive to continue fighting, and Dion sacrifices himself so Joshua and Clive can keep fighting. And then by the very end, the end of the game, the real end of the game is last cutscene is untold amounts of years in the future. Two kids are playing in the yard, pretending to be Bahamut or Phoenix and Ifrit or something like that. And it's like, what does this mean? It's very simple. It's very quiet. It's very detached from what the rest of the game is. But I like that it's not the easy way out, or quote unquote the easy way out. Like, we don't get okay, Clive finished the fight and he goes back to the hideaway, and you're sharing a drink with Lord Byron and Gav and Goots, and Mid is in the background, and there's music playing, and Nectar the Moogle comes up and he's like, "Good job, buddy." It's not that. It's, we sacrificed ourselves for this. We fought for this, and now everyone else can have a great life. And it's because of our sacrifice and because magic is gone. And I like the subtle touches to all of this. I think it's a very understated but incredibly powerful way to end an incredible spectacle game. But ending on that quiet note is, I think, a very confident creative choice on the choice of the dev team.
Yeah, I think about how we see we just see Clive on that beach with the stars going and gazing down, and we see like his body just like hardening or like turning to dust and
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and like okay, it reminds me a lot of like the end game of Avengers Endgame. It's kind of like
Sure.
you can like
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can rest now, right? Like that line, right? I kind of think of that in a
Mm-hmm.
bit,
Mm-hmm.
where it's our hero went through the thing, and then I think even Joshua mentions when right before you guys fly off, that you see Dion talking to somebody, and then Joshua says like, oh, he knows he's not going to see them again, or he's not, or that he knows he's not coming
Yeah,
back from
yeah.
this. And then yeah, you can see we all three of them go down, and I like the notion of how it seems like at this point, at the very end when the kids are playing, that like icons and magic are like seen as like a myth or a thing of legend, or like
Mm-hmm.
that's not a
Mm-hmm.
thing that exists, or if it ever did, like that was a long, long, long time ago or whatever. And then
Yeah.
it ends with like a book that Joshua wrote, and it's just called Final
Yeah.
Fantasy, which is kind of I don't know how I feel. It feels silly, but also I get it, but I don't know. It's a little too on
Mm-hmm.
the nose for me. Also, when Clive literally says the word final and fantasy in the same sentence
Does he? I don't
at
remember
the
that
end when he's fighting Ultima, when
bit.
Ultima,
Oh no, that's right. That's right. Because he's like, this is the like, because he's talking about Ultima's
he's like,
fantasy
this is
for
a
what the
fantasy
world
that will
should
never,
be.
yeah, like that's a thing. He's like, oh, it's like this is your,
It's a hard line though. It goes
yeah, it's
crazy.
like this is your fantasy, but like we'll be the final witnesses to, or something like that. And I'm just like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
a little too on the nose, but
Mm-hmm.
the implication that like magic is gone, and like they all these characters basically, they did what they. I think of that line. I forgot who it was. A philosopher said that like the goal of men is to plant seeds for trees of whose shade they'll never get to enjoy, and it's a lot.
Yeah.
Essentially, what
Mm.
happens where Clive saw the magic, the bears, the presence of magic itself being a cause for inequality, and
Yeah.
also causing Mother
Yeah.
Christmas causing the death or like the rotting of the earth. Like this needs to be gotten rid of. We need to destroy this thing. And yeah, that probably means that all the people who are bearers now or who have magic in them or as part of them are probably gonna die. But in the future, like magic will no longer be like the mess with the equilibrium of things. Like people are
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah.
be
Exactly.
people who are born are gonna have the freedom to choose what to do with their lives rather than being
Yeah.
subjected as automatic slave or whatever.
Well, and that's actually kind of the like very explicitly stated theme of the game. It is Sid's goal to lead to a world where people can die on their own terms,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's through Sid's interaction with Clive and Jill that he changes his mind, and then ultimately the sort of nebulous goal of like the whole group changes to create a world where people can live on their own terms, and that
Yeah,
is like
I do
that's
like that.
that's a powerful theme,
Yeah.
and I like that it changes over the course of the game. And I just think this game is really thematically rich, and I think it's really well done. The fact that they are willing to show the violence of Joshua and Clive's dad getting killed and the blood being splattered on Joshua's face, like that's a striking image,
Yeah.
and you can tell that fucks that little kid up, and like that continues off into the future. And so the fact that they have these violent moments and these sexual moments, and they're willing to have there be curse words and strong themes like political strife and slavery, and I think that it really sells this world as something like to take seriously. And so even though there are your cheesy, funnier characters like Byron and Mid, they're in the context of seriousness. And but I really think that this game strikes a really nice balance. And there's enough light in there, enough levity, enough jokes between the characters, to where it's not like a totally dour, sad world where fucking everything sucks and nobody likes each other. Because by the end, I'm like, no, I like these guys, and I can tell they're inside jokes to one another, and I really think they struck a nice balance with being able to go rated M with it. I think it sells the game as something more serious, but in a really like thoughtful way, like intentional way.
Yeah. Just real quick, because I know I'm going to forget. If I don't say it right now, I'm going to forget. Because you asked me what was the carryover from Final Fantasy XIV. From the, because it's the same people doing both games. The cooldown thing where like you're switching between the different icon abilities, that's very much straight out of 14, where like you're waiting, you use your abilities and there's a cooldown, you have to wait, so you go to the next thing and the next thing, and then it loops back.
It's very MMO.
Yeah, and it loops back around to the beginning. That's very much the abilities are very much that. The hard, like the old English voice acting is very much Final Fantasy 14.
Yeah.
The music, oh my god, the music in this game.
Oh, it's so good. Oh my god, it's so good.
Phenomenal.
I was playing this game mostly while Abram was staying in town with
Mhm.
me, and he wants to play the game. I don't know if he's actually going to get to it, but he wants to play this game. So he was like trying not to look when I was like doing boss battles and stuff. Sometimes I would make him like, dude, this is so fucking cool. But he got some of the music stuck in his head, and he's like, this is, I mean, this music's so goddamn good. It's great from the mega choir, incredible orchestral sweeping moments of these boss fights, but even just the simpler moments. Like there's some soft piano and like simple string tunes that play in the Hideaway. As the game progresses, the tune of the Hideaway
Mhm.
changes and it becomes more somber and it becomes a little simpler and more understated. And even those tunes are incredibly catchy and really well done. And I think this is just one of my favorite game soundtracks now.
The theme that plays when you're like in that foresty area, that forest section of the map,
Mm,
is so chill. It's
yeah,
such a
yeah.
nice track. I need to look it up later, but the one that plays like early on when you're in the forest, and you can go back to the forest later on whenever. But like that
Hmm.
track that plays in the forest, I don't know. I call it the forest theme. I don't think that's what it's called, but that's such a nice, relaxing track. It's a really good one.
Yeah.
But yeah, the music is if and this is why I wish you played the other Final Fantasy games, Tucker, because there's a lot of musical references to past Final Fantasy games. Like the battle theme for Clive is extremely similar to the battle theme from Final Fantasy VIII, where like you
Okay.
hear the
Cool.
beginning, like the first like I don't know what you call it, but like the first couple of notes. I'm like, oh, that's straight out of VIII. And there's like moments like
Hmm.
when you talk to the Moogle, you talk to Nectar, and I'm like, oh, like that's like the Moogle theme from Final Fantasy V. So there's a lot of things
Sure. Hmm.
sprinkled throughout, and
Cool.
obviously like the crystal theme, which is pretty much consistent
Yeah. Well.
over the entire franchise, like has its own variations throughout every single Final Fantasy game. But like there's like little things sprinkled here in and there where you're like, I know this from this. So like because you
Hmm.
talk about like how none of the Final Fantasy games are like directly related, but there is stuff that carries over, of course, and
There are
it's
through
like,
lines. Yeah.
oh, like if you knew this one, like you would appreciate like this particular part of this track or stuff like that.
Yeah, well, there still are some elements of that I was able to pick up. I've never heard the Final Fantasy VIII battle theme, so I did not know that it was like based on that or like referential to that. But I think even the more like widespread Final Fantasy stuff here, like that crystal theme and like the battle victory theme from the classic Final Fantasy games, I think are recontextualized here in such amazing ways that they feel so natural to this world. The crystal theme, as you're talking about, like the main fucking menu theme of Final Fantasy, but it's like a harp or like a glockenspiel or something, and it's really
Mm-hmm.
subtle, and it's whenever you're on the map, the world map, and
That's
it
right.
plays
Yeah.
this theme, and it works that theme into some of the moments when Vivian is talking to
Mm-hmm.
you, or when you're like wrapping up a somber moment, it'll play that, and I think it also is kind of Jill's theme in a way, which is really
Mm.
interesting, and then the fact that they took the victory theme from all the classic Final Fantasy games. Ba, 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 ba. That is probably the most iconic single piece of Final Fantasy music. But they don't use it very much
No.
here. They only use it when you beat incredibly long and tough battles, and then a fucking orchestra and choir come in to make the most pounding, epic, like you fucking did it, here you go victory theme. I think it's a better use of the victory theme because it happens so sparingly. And
Less is
sometimes I'll finish
more.
a fight and I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, exactly. But sometimes I'll finish a huge fight and I'm like, whoa, it didn't play. That's interesting. But it's because I'm waiting for it. I'm
It's
waiting
just
for that
quiet.
release
Yeah. Yeah.
of that moment to happen and the choir to surge in and to recontextualize that classic theme, but in such a like just gut punching, like, oh my god, this is so fucking awesome way. I really love that they have that reference for the older games, but recontextualize them to fit here and to make them feel modern and higher production value. And I think it's really special what they were able to do here, and I'm excited to play those older games and maybe be able to get sort of the inverse of what you did of hear the Moogle theme in 5 or hear the battle theme in 8 and realize, well, now
Like,
that
oh,
obviously
that's
now
from
that you pointed it
16.
out to me, but exactly, or not. I'm a little smarter than that, but know the connections a little bit better and be able to connect to the worlds. And I think sort of as a final note, or unless are there areas of this game you want to sort of dig in on, or
uh,
are we wrapping up?
not well, just real, not like it's important or real quick, but just the idea of how you basically like it seems like every major story beat is like you just get better weapons, like just better
Mm-hmm.
weapons, and not that
Yeah,
I feel like I don't know if Clive has like a signature weapon or if he feels like a signature weapon because a lot of characters like Cloud has his
yeah,
Buster Sword, Squall has
of
his
course,
Gunblade. I feel like the main
Gunblade.
one
Yeah,
for him is the one he gets like right when you get your clothes, your dad's clothes, the
Hmm.
whole wardrobe change, kind of like
Yeah.
even like the way he carries himself.
All of Clive's looks are fucking awesome. When he's a teenager in the first part of the game, that's an awesome look for him. He's kind of got actually like this chocobo hair where
Little
like it
kind of like
goes
pop
over a little
collar
bit
kind
like
of
that.
thing.
Yeah. And then you have him in his armor with the branded look on his face, which is how we knew him for most of the history of this game, because that's like the like iconic key art for this game is him with like the branded mark on his face. He's got this big armor, and I'm like, that's such a cool design. But even though I think the armored look might be my favorite,
From like the early part of the
he's
game.
fucking yeah.
Okay.
When before he gets his dad's clothes, uh the fact that he gets this fucking vampire and cape and like giant collar and dark blacks and red, it grew on me. And Clive as a character, I think, really grew on me across the course of the game. I started off feeling pretty cold on him, but I think what you come to learn about Clive in very subtle ways is he's not an outward person. He doesn't talk about his feelings very much. He doesn't have too many connections for the most of his life because his family's dead, his mom hates him, his brother's gone, he was treated as a slave. No one fucking cared about him, so he's a very guarded person. But over the course of the game, watching him build these relationships with Martha and Otto and Mid and Gav and Goots and Karen and like you go down the line, all of these characters that know him by the end of the game and that teach him something that he can take forward, and the fact that he is such a open person willing to take on the role of a leader, but not only he's an important guy, so he's only going to do the big stuff, but he's an important guy, so when someone's fucking needs seeds, they come to him, or when the kids are having a problem, he'll solve the problem for the kids. He is a really caring person, and that wasn't true at the beginning, but by the end of the game, he fills this role of Sid to such a like personal degree that everyone in the Hideaway knows him, and they know what he's capable of, and they know that they can trust him. And through the lens of other people, I really got to care about Clive. And I think that even though he's a pretty simple character, all things considered. Like he's straightforward, he's got this sense of good, he's got this tortured past, but I think he's a little more complex once you've done more of those side quests. And once you realize the fact that Goots really loves him by the end of the game, when he was probably scared of him when he met him the first time. And that I think shows really strong character writing. That this guy that I thought was one note and kind of simple became a guy that I really, really cared about at the end, and other characters really cared about by the end. I think that was awesome.
Yeah, again, that's another thing that kind of surprised. Like, I think it's kind of silly when people say like this isn't a Final Fantasy game. I'm like Clive is the prototypical Final Fantasy and like protagonist. Like he is Cloud, he is Squall, or like these like kind of gruff like tough guys who kind of they have like it seems like they have like a heart of stone, but like over time they kind of just.
I don't want her screaming, so we can put her on my lap.
And he kind of just like thaws out a little bit, right? As he gets to know more people.
Yeah,
I mean, he has a strong sense of justice, but it's like a cold justice in the beginning, sort of. And like,
it definitely is. Yeah.
And then like throughout the story, like people tell him, like I think there's like two different characters that tell him, like you're your dad's son, all right. Like just like you get the idea that I forget Eivor, I forgot what the dad's name was, but they say like they explain how like the kind of person he is, and then you do kind of get some of those flashbacks when you see how he was like before he died, and like you can see how like this father figure left a huge impact on how Clive was going to develop later on in terms of like we have branded slaves, but like they're still people. Unlike and even they remark on that like his dad was the only of like the major like royal like noble people who really cared for his people like in the way that he does. So like, but also just like the strength of the characterization and the story. I love how. When we would meet certain characters and I would just like look forward to like in my head I would think far ahead. I'm like, oh, what's it gonna be like when this character meets up with this one character? Like when Clive finds out about Joshua, I'm just thinking like, oh, like how are they both gonna react when they run into their mother later on? Like knowing that now she's like the Empress, or like and like oh, when Byron finds out that Clive is alive, I'm just thinking like, oh wow, like that's gonna be cool. Like when he runs into Joshua and realizes that Joshua's also alive. And even that moment where Clive even tells his mom Annabella, like, have you not looked out the window? Like Joshua's not dead. Like he's freaking like flying around. Like
that is great.
I love the moments where I'm just thinking like, how are these characters gonna? For me, it was almost kind of like the excitement of like Infinity War and Endgame, where like how are these different MCU characters gonna interact? Where for me, it was like, how are they gonna react to Dion? Like he's from an enemy nation, but like surely they'll realize he's not a bad guy, right? Because Dion's very he's kind of like Clive in a way where he's a dominant, and you think, oh, he's gonna be full of himself or whatever, he's the enemy nation, but like he is the most grounded person in his family. Like he is the most kind of like when his dad orders something, he kind of like hesitates, like, are you serious? Like this is gonna have like, and it's like, oh, like he cares about his people. Like even though he is Bahamut, who in my mind, historically Bahamut's a very destructive force in Final Fantasy. Like here, Dion is a person of his, like he cares about his troops to the point where they have like absolute loyalty to him over the Emperor, over his dad.
True,
which I thought was really interesting. How like oh yeah, like the Dragoons, like they only answer to like Dion. Like it's like damn, like that's how much you know you get more you get more flies with honey than with vinegar, and like how Clive and Dion are these two noble characters who like they just gravitate people towards them because of the character, and I just like the interaction between. It's like I was like, oh, hopefully they team up, and then when they team up, I'm like, yes, like Dion's sticking around, he's part of like the crew, like awesome. Because like I thought he was gonna leave away or go away, whatever, and just I like the strength of these characters, these personalities, how they clash. The whole thing, the weird rivalry with Barnabas, where like you lose the first two fights, and it's like we gotta win the third one, and just like I really even though Barnabas doesn't make that much sense until like once I did the active lore, like the active time lore thing, I'm like oh, okay, I get it. He's part of this other religion who reveres Ultima even longer because the people from this place,
and apparently he's like incredibly fucking old. Which is interesting.
And apparently the people from this continent, like he's an invader, he's an outsider. Like he took power from this one nation like a couple years ago, like what they say, like 40 years ago or something. So like he's old. And like kind of just like the fleshing out of the relationships between the different characters, I think is surprisingly deep. So like probably a little deeper than I'd say than most Final Fantasy games at this point. So I find it interesting how people are kind of like, I think mechanically it's the least Final Fantasy, but I think everything else in terms of like story and tropes and just it oozes Final Fantasy. So yeah.
And with this being a game that I love, a game that I just got incredibly excited about, talking about like all its facets, and there are certainly elements that are weak. Like people are commenting on the lack of RPG mechanics or the simplicity of them. The crafting is basically non-existent. The purchasing of the economy is fucked in this game. But these are such small potatoes in comparison to the strength of the game, which I think is in its own identity that is different from what the other Final Fantasy games have done. And the fact that it has amazing production value, and incredible voice acting, and an amazing story with political themes, and a world that is richly detailed and thought through, and there's so much care put into the areas where this game succeeds that the areas where it doesn't feel like fucking drops in a bucket to me. And I'm excited now that I not only have one but two Final Fantasy games that I absolutely adore, very different ones on the exact opposite sides of the Final Fantasy spectrum. I'm excited to dig into the other games with this as a touchstone and learning more about these musical cues and the different characters and the different themes of crystals and chocobos and Sids and all of that. And I am a new Final Fantasy fan, but I want to be and I expect to be an incredibly hardcore Final Fantasy fan. It's going to take some time.
14 to go.
These games are goddamn long. These games are fucking long.
You can skip 11. 11 to 14 are MMOs. You can skip those.
Yeah. I was planning on doing that. Over the course of the next year, I really want to dig into Final Fantasy. And I'm happy that Final Fantasy XVI speaks to a different audience. It maybe is not what hardcore Final Fantasy fans want. There's been a lot of complaining of, as you said, this doesn't feel like Final Fantasy. The RPG stuff is really weak. Why are they making it not turn-based anymore? But I think it modernizes it to where someone like me, who's found the series daunting in the past, can draw in relation to other great games. As I was mentioning at the very beginning, this feels like I'm continuing on from God of War and Last of Us, which are two of the best games I've ever played, to another game that's another one of the best games I've ever played, but has a different flavor and has that Japanese touch to it. And it continues the legacy of what Creative Business Unit 3 did with 14, and then it continues themes and ideas and the design legacy of all the way back to 4 and 6 and 10. And I think it's a really special game because of that. I think it brings in a fresh audience, and I consider myself lucky to be one of those, but I think it has endeared me so much that I want to learn more about the franchise, and I don't know if I would have done that if this game didn't speak to me in the way that it did. And it's it's just it's not easy to reinvent in this way and succeed with, I think, flying colors in the way that they did. So I find Final Fantasy 16 to be a confident game, a richly thoughtful game, and just goddamn one of the best games I've played. I love Final Fantasy 16. Any closing thoughts, Andrew?
Um, just finish 7 since we already started 7. Just finish 7, I guess.
Yeah, I'm gonna finish
But
it.
no, I love the game too. I I do understand, like, as someone who's played these games pretty much almost my whole life, I do
Yeah,
understand the disappointment of people, because it's like, I would compare it to if you went to like a restaurant and this is the 16th time you've gone to this restaurant, and the last time you came here, the burger you always get was kind of just a little off, and this time, like, oh, we don't have a burger, we have lobster, and it's like,
yeah.
I wanted a burger, but luckily I really love lobster. I really love lobster, so I'm not that bummed about it. But like,
Mhm.
because I was talking earlier in the Discord, I was like, I'm kind of jonesing for an RPG, but I'm kind of jonesing for like a turn-based RPG, because this kind of left me.
Sure.
It's like if you're a bit into something, thinking it's going to taste a certain way, and then when it doesn't,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
throws you off. But then they're
Mhm.
like, actually, this isn't bad. This is actually pretty good. But I was still left with the feeling of like, I kind of still want an RPG, a
Yeah, yeah.
JRPG, an RPG ass RPG. So
Hmm.
I mean, I love 16. It's not my favorite one. It's definitely not the
Yeah.
worst one. I'll tell you that. It's definitely not the worst one. But
Hmm.
I people who are disappointed in 16 for like the reasons, which are mostly mechanical in combat. And I mean, that's a big
Sure.
part. But like for me, I don't play it for that. I understand, but at the same time, like we mentioned earlier, like this is just going to be the natural evolution of things over time. Like it's hard
Yeah,
to keep
yeah,
something fresh for 16 entries in a row unless you like
yeah,
dramatically change what you're doing, right? So I
yeah.
get it.
And I think that's the strength of the
Hmm.
series, and I think that this, for me, really shows that. It might not show that for others, but it takes a lot of balls to quote unquote alienate your audience like this. But I feel like the Final Fantasy 14 team at Creative Business Unit 3 and all the people working there knew that this would be maybe kind of controversial and maybe sort of change their audience. But it feels like something they were passionate to do. Like this doesn't feel like, oh, we gotta match this the cinematic quality of other big games. To me, it feels like no, maybe it's time for Final Fantasy to have a shift. And we've got a good idea for it, and let's see if we can really put our all into this. And like this feels like like they really cared to make this the game that they were making. And I'd certainly love if the next Final Fantasy game returns to more turn-based stuff, or returns to an open world, or returns to many of the different things that they've done across the course of the years. Because again, this series is about reinvention. It's about following trends, pushing the medium forward, going for the best that technology can handle. And this is, I think, some of the best that the current technology can handle. So I count myself lucky to have been introduced to Final Fantasy as deeply as I am now. Um, I want to play 7, I want to play 8, I want to play 9, 10, 10 2, remake 12. Go if I can, God forbid I get my hands on the fucking um pixel remasters, but they're like $80 total, so I'm not sure if I want to bite that bullet yet. I'll want to play some of the older ones.
You can get them
But
you
I've
can get them
also
cheaper individually on Steam, because they'll do the PC version.
on everything, I
Yeah,
think.
but on the PC version, they frequently go on sale on Steam,
Oh, do they?
individually.
Okay,
At least.
they're actually not on sale on the Steam Summer Sale, which actually just ended today, so it's too late for that.
Oh, okay.
But I also am excited to be a Final Fantasy fan going into the future, because I remember watching the 2020, I want to say, PlayStation presentation where this game was revealed, and thinking, okay, cool, this is a big deal because it's been a long time since 15, but also thinking, yeah, this is like so exciting for someone else. Like I've got no touchstones here. I don't know what's fucking going on. Oh, it's action combat. I think that's new, but I didn't really know at that point in time because I never played Final Fantasy at that point in time. But now I'll be I will be locked in for Rebirth. I will be locked in for whatever this team does next, for whatever spin-offs come out. I want to really enrich myself in Final Fantasy as a franchise and as an experimental franchise. So I hope and expect this game to get lots of accolades at the end of the year. It seems to be very, very well regarded, and obviously you and I highly regard it. So Yeah. Damn. This was a great conversation. I'm very glad we were able to have
fun.
this.
Yeah, it's fun. There's Ben Starr and what's the guy's name again? Who plays Sid?
Ralph Ineson.
There's no way not one of them wins best performance this year. There's no way.
It's true. Yeah.
Probably. What's his name again? Ralph
Ineson.
Because he's in 2 games that might help him out, I guess. But
maybe, yeah.
But go play Final Fantasy VII, Tucker, and then go back and watch the Sephiroth Smash announcement with renewed eyes. With renewed eyes.
Yeah, I know. Well, if you enjoyed this, I hope you did enjoy this conversation. Again, Discord, like, subscribe. Go check out the DuoSense podcast. I'm plugging the DuoSense podcast. That's Andrew's podcast that he hosts with his friend Johnny. That just hit episode 100, and I'm like 2 hours into a 4 fucking hour long conversation now, and I'm loving it. So I highly recommend that. And if you want to talk to both of us more, we're both very active in our Discord server. So thank you for everyone for watching. 2 thumbs up. This is a 2 thumbs up conversation.